Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your day for a topic that was requested by a few of our past attendees, making your win-loss analysis work. Thank you to those who submitted questions when you registered. We've tried to incorporate those answers into the webinar. This presentation will be recorded and posted on our website for replay. We invite you to ask questions in your control panel, and we'll get to those as time permits. I am Mallory Price, Marketing and Training Coordinator here at Shipley, and joining me today is Jonathan Stevens, Vice President of Consulting at Closed. Closed is a technology and services company that has been helping companies analyze win-loss since 2017. Jonathan mentors and manages his team and has conducted over 750 win-loss engagements in the past 2.5 years. Also joining us is Brad Douglas, Executive Vice President of Global Strategy at Shipley. Brad is an APMP Fellow and authored the Shipley Business Winning Playbook series. He oversees Shipley's global operations and our training certification programs. So thank you, both of you, for joining us today and talking about this topic.
Thank you, Mallory. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad. So today, we are going to discuss a few things. First of all, we're going to go over win-loss analysis in the business winning lifecycle, why win-loss initiatives succeed or why they fail, how to get started and what tools can help you, and we will get to some more questions and answers. So without further ado, I am going to pass the mic to Brad and Jonathan, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Mallory. Appreciate you moderating this and keeping track of any questions and getting this all set up for us. And all of you who have joined today, thanks so much for carving out some time. We know we're all busy, have lots going on, especially when we're involved in business development activity. It's always a moving target. So thanks for joining us today. Let me just draw your attention for a second to this box over on the right of your screen there, this quote. A formal and rigorous win-loss analysis program enables better segmentation, product strategy, and sales enablement. Here's the interesting part. Those that take a more comprehensive approach have seen a 15 to 30% increase in revenue and up to 50% improvement in win rates. So this is a topic that should be near and dear to all of us that are involved in trying to generate revenue, win business, understand our markets, our competitors. So let's start just by kind of defining what we mean, so we're all on the same page as we go through this webinar today. So what is it? What is a win-loss analysis? You see it here, and I'll let you kind of scan that. But it's the process and practice of systematically, as you see, capturing and analyzing feedback on what went into a win or a loss, a pursuit. And we're going to talk about, Jonathan especially is going to focus on what seems to work when we try to engage in this activity. What stumbling blocks do we come upon? But knowing and acting, this bottom paragraph here, knowing and acting on this insight will improve capture and sales performance, marketing effectiveness, I would say business development, success, solution strategy, strategic alignment, and more. So this is a very important topic. It's all part, or it should be part of our business development life cycle. You know, how we go about looking for opportunities, qualifying opportunities, pursuing them, proposing for them. So this framework is going to look very familiar to many of you who are familiar with the Shipley and the Shipley approach and methodology. It's this phased approach to how we compete for and win work. And the green arrows there are pointing us to the fact that we've got to do our homework on the front end and back end of this life cycle. So whether we win or lose an opportunity, whether it gets protested or whatever the case, we've got to take whatever we can learn from that opportunity, and we'll talk about what that is that we need to learn, and we've got to feed that back to the beginning of the cycle again. Not only gather the information, analyze it, but use it on the front end of the next deal. Or to help us maybe pursue different markets or different opportunities. So it's a critical part of this business development life cycle, but I want to just state openly, it's a part of the life cycle that is often overlooked and neglected. And so hopefully this webinar can help all of us understand the importance of win-loss analysis, some of the rigor and discipline that goes into it, and how we can make it work. So again, many of you who join Shipley and are familiar with Shipley webinars and training and consulting work, you'll recognize this notion of a white hat review. This is, again, part of that life cycle, that framework, where at the end of a pursuit, we've got to look at the internal successes. What problems did we have? What workarounds did we deploy? We've got to get feedback from the customer, one way or another. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the differences with government debriefs and some of the challenges there. But we need those inputs going into what industry often calls a white hat review, where we actually look at the win-loss, what went right, what went wrong, and of course then we document it, we make sure the information is accessible, and we make recommendations for improvement. So when we talk about win-loss analysis, some of the messaging today that especially Jonathan's going to talk about is some of the customer feedback and how important that is, as well as our internal. So if we want to simplify this a little bit, we can just think of kind of the three legs of the stool. I know that's a little bit overused, but yeah, we've got to take a look when we're doing a win-loss analysis. We've got to take a look at some of our internal capture and win strategy activity. Did we do a real good job at doing a competitive assessment? Did we look at our competitors' strengths and weaknesses and gaps? Did we look at our own strengths, weaknesses, gaps, and things we need to get better at? We need to. There needs to be an internal look in this win-loss analysis. What about our messaging, our theme statements, our visuals, our graphics? Were we 100% compliant on what the customer asked for? The internal process, the capture, the sales, competitive assessment and proposal, and the all-important, this is where too often we fall short, we meaning business development professionals, in getting that customer feedback, direct and indirect feedback. What does the customer think of our engagement approach? Did they like the way we engaged with them during the sales cycle? What about the solution? Were we on target, on point? What were we lacking? Did we demonstrate a clear value proposition in all of our interactions with them? What about the actual proposal or the briefing or the demo or the site visit? How did we do? And then again, we've held a few webinars on this, and that is the assessment of the proposal itself. If we're in a competitive bidding environment, we are likely submitting a proposal of some sort. How is it? How did it go? Did we ask the customer? Were we on point with our proposal? Were we compliant? Were we responsive? Did we address their issues? How about our win strategy? Did we make it obvious why they should choose us? Did we show and demonstrate competitive focus in our proposal? The quality of our writing, how was it? Was it boilerplate? Was it same old, same old? Was it generic? Was it tailored? Was it crisp? The visuals in the proposal, and then of course, how did it look? What was the tone? How was the feel of the proposal itself? So I've gone through this really quick, but these are the elements of win-loss we cannot ignore. We need that customer feedback. direct and indirect feedback. We've got to see how we did in the proposal itself. We've got to take an internal look at our own processes. Did it take us twice as long to generate this 20-page proposal as it should have taken us, for example? Did we burn people out? So all of these things go into win-loss analysis. So with that backdrop, with that understanding, I'd like to get into some of the key principles of win-loss. And Jonathan, I'm so glad he's with us. He's been doing this a long time. He's worked in a lot of different industry segments in helping organizations and companies do their win-loss analysis, set up programs. And so, Jonathan, I'm going to turn a little over to you now and just have you cover a few of the basic principles that Closed has identified over the years. And if you'll take it away, and we'll go from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things to think about as you are running a win-loss program. So Brad did a really good job talking about really the process that you need to go through in your win-loss. It's a very introspective process where, you know, once you've secured an RFP or finished a deal cycle, you really take a step to reflect and think about, okay, what went well, what didn't go well, getting information from the customer if that's appropriate given your industry and the type of client that you're working with. But a couple of things to keep in mind before you even start to think about doing a win-loss program. It's really important that this isn't done in a silo. A lot of people, and especially, you know, people that we work with in the technology sector, it's often driven by somebody in product marketing, somebody that's working with government. It might be a proposal writer or a business development team. But really, if you don't get the buy-in from all relevant stakeholders, it's not going to gain the traction that you want. So you've got to get buy-in from people that matter, right? And that may be all the way up to the CEO of your organization. But really, whoever is going to be affected by this, make sure that they know about it. And that leads to the next point of making it a coordinated cross-functional effort. So it's got to be something, I mean, often we have product development people and salespeople and marketers and competitive intelligence professionals and business development. They're all working together to make sure that this win-loss program is effective, and then making sure those people are involved early, meaning they're involved in crafting the solution. They might not be doing all the legwork to build up your interview guides or develop your survey questions or anything like that, but you need to at least run those things by them to make sure that they can see it and react to it and know what you're going to ask and the type of information that you expect to gather. So involving them early is key, because if you do, they'll feel more ownership over it. And then once you have engaged further in your win-loss program, they'll be much more amenable to seeing the results and acting upon the results. So that's a key point, is just making sure that when you're starting these initiatives out, getting the right people engaged and making sure that they're bought into the process, because if you don't, you're going to be doing it as in a silo, and you're going to collect some great feedback potentially, but none of the people that can actually do something about that feedback and make significant change within your business, they're not going to care. Like they're not going to react to what you found unless you can ensure that they're involved throughout the process.
Excellent. Good. Okay, those are some excellent underlying principles to remember as we maybe try to either improve on or begin executing the win-loss. So the rest of the webinar, for everyone's sake, what we've done, we got a ton of questions as people registered for this, and so we've tried to compartmentalize those and consolidate them a little bit. And so we're going to go through a sequence of questions and provide some learning and insights in response to those questions. And so, Jonathan, I'm going to ask you to just give a little bit of feedback on a few examples. People wanted to know about ROI, return on investment. If we launch into this and we devote some resources to this, what can we expect? So would you take a few minutes and walk through some ROI that you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll kind of talk high level a little bit at first in terms of some of the ROI type of scenarios that you might encounter. But essentially, if you're doing win-loss analysis, the goal is to improve your win rate. And improving win rates has a really tangible impact on your top line. And in many cases, so for many of the people listening to this, they're going to be in a business to business or business to government type scenario. If you can think about your average deal size, maybe for some of you that might be $10,000, for some of you that might be $10 million, right? If you're selling really large government contracts. But in essence, if you engage in a win-loss program, if it enables you to just win one more deal than you otherwise may have won, then the program pays for itself. So I know that's kind of a high-level hypothetical type of scenario. Let me run you into a couple of examples that we've seen. So one company that we were working with engaged in a win-loss program with us, and for a quarter, so for a 3-month period, they decided, look, we really want to collect feedback on a particular product that we are losing pretty regularly in. Like our win rate is a lot lower for that product than for the other products we have. And this product was sold as an add-on product. And we found a couple of interesting things. One was that first, the add-on product was more expensive than the core product. So people were buying the core product and then they were being pitched the add-on product at some point in their customer journey. And they thought, well, this is more expensive than what we initially bought, and it doesn't really seem to be adding that much value. We actually found that a few savvy customers learned that they could get access to all of the features of the add-on product without actually paying more. So there weren't effective paywalls. This was a software-based product. There weren't effective paywalls to make sure that they didn't get access to that add-on product. And there were a couple of other things about it, just the way it was pitched, the way it was packaged with the core product. It didn't really make a lot of sense. So long story short, we presented some of this feedback back to our client, and they thought, wow, we really didn't know that this was the perception people had, and this was the reason why they weren't buying. So they made a few changes, and as a result, they came back to us 6 months later and they said, look, we implemented a few changes based on the feedback that we got on that product, and our revenue is up significantly as a result on that particular product line. So when you really know what customers think about what you're saying, it can make a big difference. Here's a couple of quotes on this slide that you can see of people that have engaged and gained some benefit from us. So Glenn Rummy, he's a competitive intelligence manager at NICE in Contact, so contact center platform. Eric Morgan, former CEO at Workfront, project management tool, and at Client Success, TJ Ruff has had a great experience as well. So those are a couple of the qualitative and quantitative effects. Eric said, critical in making investment decisions, some really tangible ROI here. And Accenture has also mentioned companies that conduct win-loss reviews see an 18% jump in win rate when done correctly. And so they continue to go on and talk about what that actually means. But I think the operative term there is when done correctly. There's some great ways to do win-loss. There's some less great ways to do win-loss. So it's important that you're engaging with somebody, whether you're doing it yourself, you're engaging a third party to do this, you want to make sure that you're implementing some best practices so your capture rates are improved as much as possible from your win-loss program.
Thanks, Jonathan. Excellent. And we're going to, I think, talk a little later here about how we go about this and some of the components that help us monitor and measure, the metrics. And ultimately, if we can't come up with an ROI and a measurement, whether it's win rate or engaging customers at a higher level, then we have to ask ourselves, why are we doing it? So there is plenty of evidence, I think, that doing a win-loss analysis and doing it effectively, it pays off. You know, it pays dividends. And here you see that same quote we started with at the beginning of the webinar, that you can expect to see improvements. Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Now, we're going to touch on ROI a little bit more, but this other question that came in was intriguing, and we saw this, Mallory, several times as people registered and submitted their questions. You know, what reasons do they have for not engaging in a win-loss? And I'll go on record as saying we work with enough clients in enough industries. The biggest reason is they're just on to the next deal. They're on to the next opportunity, and they just don't have it built into their discipline. And so, as hard as that might be to accept, it's not a lack of resources necessarily, although that's an issue. Lack of resources. Sometimes it's lack of know-how. We hope this webinar helps you understand some of the know-how, but really it comes down to leadership a lot of times, and discipline. So just the last thing here, and I'll kind of let you look through this, all of you, because this will be recorded. We'll also post this on our website. But again, a little more on win-loss before we talk about why it sometimes doesn't work. But notice this quote here, and this has to do with why companies don't do it. Whether the reason is lack of resources, commitment, or process, this is fascinating to me. Fewer than 20% of organizations conduct win-loss analysis with any regularity or discipline. So this just kind of confirms what I tried to say, that we see in industry, that it's not so much lack of resource or ability. It's the leadership and the discipline that really has to come into play here. So Jonathan, on this next slide, would you walk us through, given your experience, what are some actual other points? What are some other reasons why some companies try this and don't succeed, and maybe they let it go?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, one of them, Brad, you really touched on already, is, lack of leadership, endorsement, or priority. So it's hard to get any traction with a win-loss program if you don't have the leadership engaged. So that's one thing. The other thing, fragmented into small business units versus an organization-wide initiative, it can be hard when you're just working with one product line, or when you're working within one segment of the business to get the kind of volume of data that you need to really be conclusive in what you find. So the more opportunities you're looking at, and the broader you're looking across your organization, the better you can see trends across the data points that you can collect. Ill-defined objectives and measures, I think this is a key point, is people often start with a really vague outcome. What we encourage people to do when they start a program like this is think about it in the context of the scientific method. Imagine you're a chemist in a lab, and basically you have a hypothesis about what kind of result you're going to see from this win-loss experiment. And essentially, you're doing win-loss analysis to test your hypothesis. So make sure that as you go in, you have an idea of this is what we think is going on, but have the humility and understanding to know that maybe we're totally wrong. And once we go out and do this research, we're going to find out what really matters. But being focused on the exact type of things that you want to know and the exact outcomes you want from your from your program is really important. And then lack of personnel, know-how, or bandwidth. To be totally honest with you, I think this is the most common reason these initiatives fail, is when people start to do a program like this, they don't know what to do. So it seems obvious, but once they get into it, they run into a whole bunch of roadblocks, and they think, oh man, like I didn't realize this would be such a challenge. And it takes more time than they think it's going to take. And then you need to have a process for how you do this. One of the things that you mentioned, Brad, on the previous slide is having a disciplined and repeating way that you do this. Most of the win-loss programs that we run into when people kind of are doing the do-it-yourself method is it's just a one-time thing. they think, oh, we need to go collect some data. And then they collect some data, they maybe build out some, slide deck that shows what they found, but there's no real strong plan for doing this on an ongoing basis. So having a process and making it a program, making it something that you do systematically in your business over time is much better than just doing it at a point in time. Point in time is better than nothing for sure, but you need to be making sure that you're systematic and that other people are bought in, so that continued feedback loop can be successful.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. And this is it's so good for us to, as organizations, to take that time to look at this list right here is a good one, to say why not? Why aren't we succeeding? So thank you. And let me just interject here. Some of you may be wondering why Shipley and Closed, why we're engaging in this webinar together. We have some common clients. This idea of win-loss analysis is so critical to an overall successful business development life cycle or sales life cycle. And so having these common clients, we become a little bit familiar with each other and the services and value that we bring on engagements. And one of the things that really has caught my attention as we've engaged with Closed and worked with them on similar clients and common clients was this statement. Jonathan, you just want to cover this real quick?
Sure. Yeah, so I don't read every word on every slide, but this is important, so I'm going to read this one. It's surprising how often we discover multiple teams trying to implement win-loss analysis simultaneously at the same company. These redundant efforts are wasteful and counterproductive. They are the result of poor communication between departments and a lack of executive sponsorship. And it depends on the company of how much of a failure this is. Or a success this is, but we've seen this happen a lot of the time, especially in large organizations where there's departmental silos. It's important for those things for those parts of the company to work together. And the main reason for this is because what we found is when your company is organized by product lines or segments or something like that, basically the reasons why you win and lose may be consistent across departments. So if these organizations aren't talking to each other, they might be things that they could have learned from another department that they're not, because there isn't clear communication between the departments. So that's something to think about. I mean, there's product and segment specific information, but a lot of the time there's feedback that you're getting that's really across the entire organization. So a sharing of that information really brings a lot of benefits. And sometimes if you don't share as well, you don't get enough data on any one topic to really know if it's a trend. If you have multiple departments working together, you're going to have more data, and then you're going to be able to more clearly see trends in the reasons that people are choosing or not choosing to buy from you. So that's one way that this needs to happen. I realize it's harder at some organizations than others, right? And we've seen a lot of companies start with just one part of the company and then they expand to other parts, but it definitely is better when everybody's bought in.
Okay, boy, Jonathan, and you kind of answered the question. The follow-up I was going to ask you is, have you seen situations where, because we actually see several companies doing this, where they run a pilot, for example, a pilot program,
yeah,
with one group, selling to a certain market segment, and they're using that to determine whether they should go all out. Do you see that being maybe a successful model for some?
Yeah, I think it definitely is. And here's one thing about win-loss that I think a lot of people, the best case scenario is that the whole company is doing it, leadership is engaged, but sometimes, it takes a little while to get everybody on board, and there's a little bit of a snowball effect that needs to take place. So I think, even though this is going to sound like I'm contradicting what I just said, I think when you start, it's helpful to think about, maybe we just start with one department to prove the value, but thinking about the ultimate goal of getting it adopted into other parts of the company, I think is an important long-term vision. But yeah, I mean, we often see, especially at larger companies, one department will do a pilot for this, they start to look at it and they think, okay, this is actually really beneficial. We're learning a lot. And usually there's an organic knowledge sharing that happens where other departments learn about this program, they see the benefit, they want to be involved too, and it expands from there. So yeah, definitely, Brad. I see people starting small, but the goal should always be, let's expand this to broader pastures in the organization.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. Thank you. Great discussion. We're not going to dwell on this much, but we did see this a few times being asked. How does the analysis differ whether you win or lose? So I'm going to address this quickly, and then Jonathan, I'll ask you for your 2 bits. But the win-loss analysis, it shouldn't be all that different. We're still going to look at our internal approach. We're still going to want to know about our customer engagement. How was that? How was it perceived? We're still going to want to know about the proposal. Was it on the mark? Did we miss anything? What about our solution? You know, was it on point? So it's still going to be very similar, but clearly we're going to have to tailor. If we have the chance to actually interview, debrief, sit down, virtual or in person, with the end customer, whether it's a government agency or private sector, it doesn't matter. We still want to use this opportunity. I think this is the best opportunity to gain some really powerful competitive intelligence. If we can find out, especially if we lost, why, you know, and most of the sales team is going to say, well, we lost on price, but we've got to peel that onion back and get to the real reason, you know. So the process, the approach, I think, is similar, but we've got to tailor our approach whether we won or not. If we won, there's no reason we can't also, in a debrief, try to uncover information about our competitive position and our competitors. Why did we win? Were we low price, best value? What were we? So Jonathan, that's my take. Any other tidbits on tailoring whether you won or lost?
Yeah, some quick thoughts on this. Often we have people come to us and they say, "Oh, we only just want to do some interviews on our losses." And I always tell people, don't do that, because the underlying assumption there is that if we understand the reasons why we're losing, we can just fix those things and then we'll win more. That is not necessarily true, and it may be a little bit counterintuitive, but what we've found is that the reasons people buy aren't necessarily just the opposite of why they don't buy, right? If you fix your losses, maybe the people that buy from you, they're just interested in different things. And maybe the reasons why somebody else didn't buy from you just aren't that important to somebody that did buy from you. So I think it's important whenever you engage in one of these programs, what Brad said is absolutely true. Like, the approach you take isn't going to be that different with wins or losses, but the type of feedback you get might be surprisingly different. So make sure you don't just do one or the other. Make sure you have some sort of balance between the type of feedback you're getting from both types of buyers.
Excellent. Okay, we're gonna cruise through a little bit these next couple of questions, because the most common thing that we were asked when you all registered was, how do you get started? You know, where is a good starting point if we decide we want to up our game when it comes to win-loss analysis? So we want to make sure we don't run out of time and respect your time, and we want to make sure we get to that. So the next question had to do with measurement and metrics, you know, and how is win-loss data generally reported? How is it effectively measured? So again, here, this is not Shipley's core business. It's not figuring out how to analyze and assess and measure and monitor win-loss data. That's not our sweet spot, is the data management, data analysis, but it is for closed. And I've seen their dashboards, I've seen their feedback and reports real time with several clients. So will you just kind of give us a taste, Jonathan, of some of the reporting capabilities when you marry up effective win-loss process and approach to doing it with the discipline, with automation and data? To me, it is fabulous what comes out. So will you just kind of talk us through some of the available options for measuring and metrics?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, to be fair, I could probably talk for a whole hour on this one question, but I'll give just a little snippet here. So, what you're seeing is the closed dashboard. I mean, this is through our proprietary software, the closed platform. You know, this is one way to do it. I'm obviously biased, and I think it's the best way. Essentially, what we've done is for each data point we collect, and when I say data points, what I really mean is interview responses and survey responses. We collect a variety of different pieces of data from that. So there's one is what we call metadata, which is objective, just pieces of data that usually comes from people's CRM. So you'll see this, there's a few little charts on this page, but you'll see things like win rate by close date. The close date isn't anybody's opinion, right? It's just a data point. Same with amounts and lead source and industry and other things like that. So those are some kind of data points that you want to collect, and this dashboard is really meant to show what's happening, right? It doesn't necessarily tell you why it's happening, but it's important to do. And if you don't use closed, you can often do this as well. Like you can just download this from your CRM and your spreadsheet or something like that, but it's helpful to just get a picture of what's going on, right? So in this case, like if you look at that chart on the bottom left, this company's winning a lot less in their enterprise segment than they are in mid-market and SMB. And it may be a company that their whole strategic positioning is around the down market and they don't really have a great enterprise offering yet. And maybe they know that, but maybe they think they're great at enterprise, and then they start to look at the data and they realize, whoa, we're actually not. Like we win most in the mid-market and SMB space and not in our enterprise space. So I think, you know, you can create these charts using, you know, an Excel sheet or Google sheet or something like that. You can use something more sophisticated like the closed platform. But in essence, it's helpful at the beginning just to tag every deal with some critical metadata that helps you understand what's going on. The why is kind of the next step. And that's what is on this next page is what we call decision drivers. So in essence, whenever we collect, or whenever we do an interview, we tag the interview with what were the main categories of feedback or the main reasons why a deal was won or lost. So one, for example, like if I was working with a software company, user experience and interface, which is the top reason why that you see in the why we win category, that's a major strength of this hypothetical situation. So you want to see, okay, how often is that coming up? And you might come to the conclusion of something like, okay, well, we did 30 interviews, and in 15 cases, people said our user experience was much better than the competition, and it was a key reason why they bought. So that would be what you call a win driver, and a pretty strong one. I mean, often those things don't come up in 50% of deals. That would be a very strong positive win driver. So those are the kind of things. So what that essentially enables you to do is to take some data that's inherently qualitative, like interview data, and if you tag it with some of these themes, and if you have a really disciplined, systematic way of doing it, then you can start to kind of separate the forest from the trees and see, okay, what are the big picture themes that are happening within this feedback that I'm collecting? Because when you just have like interview transcripts, it's hard. You have to tag these. And, you know, we have a whole methodology about how they do that. You know, the closed way is one way. I think there's other ways you can think about this as well, but essentially it's just looking at what are the main things that are driving the decisions people are making, and then codifying those, and then seeing the trends of how those work over time.
Excellent. So just in short then, Jonathan, I mean, and we're being careful not to pitch any solution, but the closed platform interacts well with CRM and other pipeline type tools, right?
Yeah. So
okay.
yeah, I mean, if you use closed, a lot of this will be automated, and much easier than doing it through a manual process. But that's not to say that you can't, right? I mean, I've seen people do this pretty successfully without any sort of third-party tool, and it just ends up taking more time because you have to do this a lot more manually. But you're right. Like, I mean, we can plug into your CRM, we can pull all this data, so it just streamlines the process for getting these kind of insights. But it's not something that you can't do yourself. You just may end up taking a lot more time and doing it a little bit more manually.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. And again, this could be a whole webinar or two on its own, talking through how and I will just chime in here. I've seen how they were able to customize this and tailor it based on markets and size and scalability of opportunities and deals. So awesome. So yes, there is a way to measure this. There are metrics available. It takes some good setup and work and vision, and with or without a third-party platform, we can find a way to monitor and measure and track effectiveness. Thanks, Jonathan. That was really helpful. Now we got several questions too, and I know a lot of you are working in the public sector space. What's different about public sector win-loss analysis? Well, I could go on for hours about this, but we won't. This is we're kind of limiting here to an hour discussion, but it certainly differs. Public sector debriefs, win-loss analysis, of course, it's in the federal space, U.S. federal space, it's governed by the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and we have to honor that and respect it, and so does the government. So the point here, in answer to the question, is there is no one way that a government customer, education, state, local, federal, they're going to differ. They're going to differ, but they're going to hold to, at least in the U.S. federal government, certain regulations that they won't vary from. They will respect the FAR. Well, our recommendation is always, always, always ask your government customer for a debrief. Many of the agencies and groups are going to allow you to provide questions in advance of a debrief. Take that opportunity strategically and seriously, because how we ask the questions, what questions we ask for a debrief, win or lose, are very, very strategic and important. So when given the chance to ask questions in advance of a formal debrief, take it. Document everything. When we're doing a win-loss analysis on a government pursuit of any type, document everything, not just after the award and after the fact, but all along the way. Why? Because at least in the federal government, there is a tendency we might have to experience a protest. Whether we're protesting or whether the awardee, someone else, or the company that lost is protesting, we won, we got to be prepared. So document everything. And then here you just see a little clip out of the FAR. In accordance with FAR, the contracting officer shall make every attempt to debrief the unsuccessful offerer as soon as practical. So again, that will vary based on the contracting officer, who you're working with. Here you see, I just took a clip out of this is right off of Defense Acquisition University's site. You can see that this was an example of a pre-debrief question. Did the government desire something that was missing from our proposal? That's an interesting question, pretty broad. Did we miss anything, government? And the government's answer, the government does not evaluate based on unpublicized desires. We evaluate strictly based on the factors and sub-factors contained in the RFP. In other words, that was kind of a dumb question. All right. And then there's another. So take advantage when you have the chance with a government customer to use this part of your win-loss analysis. It becomes a little more complicated, a little more cumbersome, because you can't always have that dialogue that you can with private sector. And here you see, again, a clip out of some of the FAR regulation. DOD, Department of Defense, must provide the debriefed offer a copy of the agency's written source selection decision document in some circumstances. And then it tells you what those circumstances are. So the government is responsible to provide us some of this feedback. And it may not be in the same format as we can do with, a business-to-business sale, but it's so important. It's vital. Here you see, okay, this was something. Let's imagine that we were given this feedback, and let's say that we're OGLS. That's our company, and our competitor is ACLK joint venture. All right, and these were the factors that the government was going to make the contract award to. All right, you can see them here: technical, management, price, past performance, and you can see the ratings. We did pretty good, good, outstanding. This was our price, and they had substantial confidence in our past performance that we provided. Our competitor, they did pretty good. They scored a few more outstandings than we did, but they had a higher price. Who won? Who would the government award based on this little summary of the debrief? Well, it went to ACLK joint venture. They offered an outstanding approach in the technical factor. The total evaluated price was 7% higher, but it was determined that that slight price increase was justified due to the benefits that they offered in their proposal. All right, so that walks us through a little bit of the government, U.S. federal government mentality. But again, they owe us a debrief, and we've got to try to get that as part of our overall win-loss analysis, if that's the market we're competing in. So we could spend, again, hours on that. A lot of information out there available to you if you're wondering how to do that, and what you can and can't do when dealing with the government. But again, it will vary. It's going to vary from state to state, local government to local government, U.S. federal government, even maybe agency to agency a little bit. Okay, the most common question we got for you all that signed up for this webinar and you're attending was, how do we get started? Where do we start? If this is something we believe in, we've got support for, where do we get started? And so, Jonathan, I'm going to kind of let you, there's a lot of information here, and I invite all those today who are participating to go back and review this, because it's great information if you're ready to get started. So, Jonathan, you want to walk through these next few slides, please?
Yeah, sure. Couple of ideas that you should think about as you're getting started. And I realize a lot of what we talked about here is really best practices and thinking about, what is a really gold star, best in class type of win-loss program look like. I hope nobody gets overwhelmed by that or intimidated by that and think, how would I even approach something like this? When it comes to win-loss, something is almost always better than nothing. I mean, at the very least, I've seen a do-it-yourself win-loss program, and basically there were some product marketers in an organization. They just got a list of customers, and they started calling them, and they made some notes in their notes app in their, in their phone, basically. That was pretty rudimentary, but it was better than nothing. And so there's a couple of key things that I would say you have to have before you get started with one of these. Is first, you have to have a list of questions. You have to have some people to talk to, and then you have to have a way to reach out to them. That's really high level. This next slide is really the 8 steps. So I would say this is kind of going to the next level, but first you need to get some sort of executive sponsorship. So get the people that are going to be affected by this data engaged. Determine the most important win-loss channels. We haven't talked a lot about channels. We have a whole bunch of content on that, but basically the 4 channels are buyer interviews, buyer surveys, internal or sales rep interviews, and internal sales rep surveys. As Brad mentioned, if you're a government organization, you're going to get that external feedback by mandate from the government. They're required to give that to you, but doing an internal evaluation can be just as valuable if you're dealing in a business to government type of go-to-market plan. Choose the right questions to ask. So this is important, right? And it goes back to the analogy I made of the chemist in the lab, thinking about your hypothesis and then determining what do we want to test with our hypothesis? What are the questions that are going to lead us to the answers that we want? And typically what we do is we build that into either an interview guide or a survey script that we use, and then build an operational plan. So in essence, what this looks like is once we have the questions, once we know how we're going to try to collect the feedback, we need to have a plan for how we're going to reach out to people, collect the information, and then report it out to the people that matter. So there's different ways you can do that. We have a pretty systematic way that we've developed that, but you need to figure out how are you going to get people either on the phone or to respond to your survey, and then how are you going to report the information to the people that can make decisions on it. And then I love this next one. Don't expect perfection, right? You'll learn so much more by just moving forward and doing this than, sitting in a boardroom and debating on the best ways to do it. Just get started and start with a pilot. Don't expect it to be perfect. You'll learn a ton in the process, and evaluate and interpret the results. So once you get the data, try to summarize it in some way that makes sense to people in a leadership position, people that can actually affect change within the organization. And then once you get those results, share it widely. One of the things that I think is a big failing of these is people share they keep it too close to the vest, and they'll maybe make a slide deck with the results and share it with 5 people. I recommend sharing it with dozens of people. And in some organizations that might not be appropriate, but if you have a strong culture of transparency within your organization, I recommend just share it with people that can make a difference, because the more people get their eyes on this, the more minds you have collectively thinking about solutions. And then finally, and this is kind of where the feedback loop comes in, is have some sort of way you can measure success. So if you're doing this with new business wins and losses, measure your win rates, see if they actually go up as a result of this. If you've been doing this for 6 months, are your win rates starting to look better than they did 6 months ago? If you're doing customer retention, or what we call churn interviews, are you getting fewer customers leaving than you did before? So those are some key elements. But I think, honestly, if I was to say for people starting this for the first time, point number 5 is probably the most important, is just get started. Start learning, and you'll learn a lot through the process. And there's a lot of resources available publicly that you can use to help you as well. But just get started. Don't think it needs to be perfect right off the bat.
And to that very point, Jonathan, and you've said this a couple times, get, like you said, get start. Something is better than nothing. And
yeah.
If we were tight on resources and time and all that, you see this quote here from one of the customers: "Start the dang program,"
Yeah. So Sanjay Puri, he's a good guy. He was one of those that we worked with that just really started small, and he basically did it himself. And then he engaged with Closed, and Avalara has actually been a client of Closed for quite some time. They've done some of these webinars for us, and they've been a great partner, but it really started quite small. And one of the things that we do that's a pretty effective sales strategy is we just say, look, let's just do a free interview for you. See what you get from doing one. You don't have to do that with Closed. You can just do it yourself. Just do one interview with a customer. And if you have some intelligent questions that you're asking, you're going to get some answers that you probably didn't expect. And so getting just one data point will start the wheels turning and get things off the ground.
And then along with that, Jonathan, here's some key points on the types of data. Would you just address this real quick?
Yep. Yeah. So we've kind of glossed over this a little bit, and some of this might be a little fuzzy because that wasn't the point of this webinar. But But I'll tell you, pulling data from your CRM, you don't have to go to any external source like a buyer or even an internal person like a sales rep. You can get a lot from your CRM data, and that was shown in one of our screenshots, which we call the win rates tab. But basically, you can determine what's going on, right? We're winning more big deals than small deals. We're winning more in one part of the world than another part of the world. The other one is your team that is, in some context, this is called the sales team or the capture team or business development. You can go for an internal perspective. I think sometimes there's a little bias in there, but it's definitely useful feedback just to see what are the people that are directly trying to win business telling you about what's going on. And then finally, it's getting buyer or customer feedback. So these are the people that are actually making the decisions to either purchase or not to purchase from you. So they're going to have probably the most unbiased and complete feedback in terms of why they made the decisions that they made. And if you have a really good information collection process, you can get the kind of information from them that's going to enable you to make intelligent decisions about how you can improve win rates and improve the way you go to market.
And I will just give my opinion here that point number 3 there is often the hardest because it's just sometimes, especially if we lost the deal, no one wants to go back to the customer and talk about, it's like opening up a wound, that has started to heal sometimes. So, but that is so vital. It's so vital that we get that customer feedback. And then this is a lot of information, but this is just, I think, some good, solid tips on collecting the data and keeping it simple. Anything here that Jonathan you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I think one of the things, especially that top point, is I've seen people, especially people with a marketing research background, sometimes they can just blow this up. When they're doing surveys, they can ask way too many questions, and there's definitely a trade-off with how many questions or how long you want to engage the feedback provider and the number of data points you're going to get. So like when we do interviews, we keep them to 30 minutes in almost every case. Some people may think that's too short, but if you ask people for more time, you're just going to get fewer people that are willing to give you that time. And so the trade-off that we believe is, when you're doing an interview, keep it to 30 minutes. When you're doing a survey, keep it to, 5 questions or less. You want to make the survey take ideally less than 2 minutes, but definitely not more than 5 minutes to complete, because that trade-off is you're going to get more feedback from more people if you can make sure that it's brief. So those are a couple of key points that I would say. And just the way you ask the questions, and especially I see this with some people that are new to interviewing, they ask questions that are very convoluted and they think they need to ask some long, detailed question. You don't necessarily need to do that. Often the questions that are shorter and more to the point are better. I mean, I'll often ask questions like, what did you like about this product? It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Just direct to the point, asking them what they think.
Yeah, good. And then the last point on kind of data collection and channels, some pros and cons here of getting information from our internal, as Jonathan said, sales and capture team versus the customer. I find this kind of fascinating, that advantages and disadvantages, and confidence levels, I guess, of the various channels of information that we get. So I think the key, Jonathan, as I interpret this, is we've got to get it from both.
Yeah. And here's something that I'll say about that is I think it's fascinating to compare how sales teams tell you deals are going and how customers tell you deals are going, because I think often when people talk about this, they tend to throw sales teams under the bus and say, oh, well, they're just going to lie to you or something like that. I don't actually think that's always the case. And I think a lot of times either sales teams just don't have the full information because buyers don't want to reveal everything that they're thinking when they're trying to buy from them. But also it varies by organization. I've actually worked with organizations where the sales teams are quite self-aware, and the feedback that they give is somewhat similar to what the customers are giving. So it's not only a good way to measure why you're winning and lose, but it's also gives you a lot of insight as to how well your sales team is really understanding the core reasons why you're winning and losing. And in some cases with more mature sales organizations, they're pretty spot on. Like, they're not too far off. You still get more from the customer usually, but I think it's an interesting measure just to see how different those two types of feedback are.
Excellent. Good. All right. Well, Mallory, we're winding down here, and I just want to mention to everyone that there are a couple of handouts available to you. If you go to your webinar navigation panel, we've put a couple of handouts there. One is a Shipley very basic tool, kind of a white hat lessons learned survey instrument. It's just in Microsoft Word. It's simple. And then there's a really nice, fairly in-depth document that Closed has provided on some of the best practices that we see in win-loss analysis, and it's quite in-depth. It's there as well. So please take a minute, download those, and let that be some helps for you. Mallory, is there any? I know we're about out of time here, but we've hopefully addressed a lot of questions as we go. Mallory, anything else that you wanted to raise here?
Yes, so this question has been covered, at least in part. But so win-loss analysis requires a lot of participation from the right people. So Jonathan, how do you have any tips or tricks on increasing that participation, whether that's in interviews, whether that's within your company, just increasing participation overall?
Yeah. So this is honestly another question that I could spend a whole hour on, but I'll give you the Cliff's Notes here. So essentially, a couple of things. Think about how you're reaching out, and I would start with the most scalable and easy way to do the outreach. Typically for us, what that means is emails. So send people some emails. There's what we call a warm handoff email. So essentially that's, we have our clients basically tell the person that we're trying to get to participate, they introduce that person to Closed. If you're doing this yourself, you don't need to do that necessarily, but you need to send emails, and you need to send more than one. So many people will say, oh yeah, I sent a whole bunch of emails, but nobody responded. You know, in this day and age, email is so ubiquitous that often people just don't respond. So we send people a handful of emails. We try to not go overboard, but we typically send people about 2 emails a week for about 3 weeks. And typically what we see is people that respond usually respond on the second or third email. That's the most common, but there's a lot more, there's a lot of responses that happen on emails 4, 5, and 6 as well. So being persistent in your outreach is one thing. The other thing is you really need to offer some sort of incentive. That's going to depend on the type of information you're trying to collect. This is also a very sensitive topic, especially for those of you that are selling to government. Some people that work for government cannot accept any sort of incentive for participating in, you know, a feedback session because of pay-to-play rules and other things. So keep in mind who your buyers are. Typically corporate buyers, that's not really an issue, but it will give you more data if people have some sort of remuneration. Typically what we do is in the form of like a Starbucks gift card or an Amazon gift card or something like that. And then the last thing I'll say is just know that not everybody's going to respond. So if you know, when we first engage with people, sometimes they say, oh, okay, well, we're going to do 10 interviews. Here's 10 names. That's never going to happen, right? Like some people just won't respond. And so you need to have realistic expectations of the kind of response you can get. And so keep that in mind. Like if you want, if it's interviews, typically you're not going to get more than 20%. Occasionally we get higher than that depending on the type of buyer, but be realistic about it.
Great. Well, we're up against the time, but just let me. I'd like to point you to some really good resources that Closed provides on their site. This is an example of a few of them. We invite you to spend time there, learn more, go more in depth in some of these topics. Some of you who are familiar with Shipley and the work we do and the methods we provide, we also have a whole toolkit. We haven't put this on the webinar download, just the survey is what we've put on the downloadable tool, but there's a whole white hat lessons learned toolkit, as many of you are already familiar with, that can help guide, you know, and tee this up a little bit. And then here's our next webinar that we're offering at Shipley. And Jonathan, I understand you all have a free WinLoss 101 series for people.
Yeah, that's right. So this is the only explicit selling that I'm going to do in this webinar. But essentially, we're going to invite you all to participate in our WinLoss 101 series. Essentially, it's a 6-week session. We've already recorded a couple of them, but you can go back and listen to the recordings. But these are live sessions that we do every Friday, and it basically gives you a beginner course on how to get started. It does include some homework, so be prepared to do a little homework. It's not too onerous. The benefit of doing the homework is we actually will give you a couple of free interviews if you complete the first 3 assignments. So that's a little carrot to encourage you to participate. But yeah, I think it's some great information. It's kind of like this in that we're not explicitly trying to tell you to use Closed. We just want to enable you with the tools to do win-loss. So plug into that if you're interested. Excellent.
Everyone, thank you for your time today, and we welcome feedback. You know, these topics that we provide these webinars on come from you all, and so we welcome feedback and ideas and topics that you'd like us to address. Jonathan, I can't thank you enough. It's been great to work with you all and share information, and thanks for your time as well.
Yeah, thank you, Brad and Mallory. This has been a lot of fun, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and Mallory, thanks so much. So everybody, please have a great rest of your day today, and we'll be in touch soon. Take care.